My name is Clara Beaumont. For 47 years, my world was a duet, a life composed in harmony with my husband, Henry. We lived in Port Blossom, a small city on the Oregon coast where the mist hangs in the pines like a whispered secret and the air always carries a faint, briny scent of the sea. Henry was a quiet man, a structural engineer by trade, but a poet and a woodworker by soul. He saw the world in lines and foundations, in things built to last. I, on the other hand, was the color, the music, the one who filled our sturdy home with the scent of baking bread and the warmth of stories. In April, the music stopped. Henry passed away from a sudden heart ailment, leaving a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence in our house. The grief was a fog, dense and disorienting, and for months, I simply drifted. But as the year waned and the holidays approached, a flicker of purpose returned. This would be my first Christmas alone, and the thought of the hollow quiet on that day was more than I could bear. So, I decided to build a dam against the silence. I would host Christmas dinner. It wouldn't be a grand affair. Just our son, Adam, and his wife, Isabella. I simply wanted the house to feel like a home again, to fill it with the familiar echoes of family. I wanted to see Adam's face at the head of the table where his father used to sit, to hear his laughter, to feel, for just one afternoon, that the foundation Henry had built was still standing. The ache in my heart spurred me into motion. For 2 full days, I didn't just cook, I curated memories. I made Henry's favorite slow-roasted rosemary chicken, the kind that fills the house with an earthy, pine-like fragrance. I baked sourdough bread from a starter Henry and I had nurtured for years. The stuffing was a savory mix of that bread with sage and caramelized onions. I whipped potatoes with cream and garlic until they were a cloud, roasted Brussels sprouts with a balsamic glaze until they were sweet and tender, and, for dessert, an apple crumble with an oat and cinnamon topping that Adam had adored since he was a boy. The house, which had felt so vast and empty, began to shrink back to its proper size, filled with the comforting aromas of a shared past. I bought a Rael Douglas fir, its needles sharp and fragrant, and spent an entire afternoon decorating it. I unwrapped each ornament from its delicate tissue paper cradle. There was the silver bell from our first Christmas together, Adam's lopsided clay handprint from kindergarten, the fragile glass hummingbird I'd bought on our anniversary trip to the coast. Each one was a small, glittering piece of our history. I even set the table with the good china, the porcelain with the delicate blue floral pattern that we only used for the most special occasions. I polished the silver until it gleamed and placed linen napkins, ironed and folded, beside each plate. I lit candles, put on a record of quiet folk carols, and for a few precious hours, the house felt whole again. I felt a flutter of anticipation, a nervous excitement that had been dormant for months. I put on a deep emerald green dress, a soft cashmere that Henry had always said brought out the color of my eyes. I styled my silver hair, added a touch of lipstick, and felt a semblance of the woman I used to be, the woman who hosted holiday gatherings with an easy, confident grace. Dinner was scheduled for 4 o'clock. By 3, everything was ready. The chicken was resting, the sides were warm in the oven, and the crumble was cooling on the counter, its sweet scent mingling with the pine of the tree. I sent Adam a simple text, "Everything's ready. Can't wait to see you both soon." No reply. At 4, I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the street. The sky was a soft, bruised purple and a gentle rain had begun to fall, slicking the pavement and blurring the streetlights. 4:15. My phone remained silent. Maybe they were caught in holiday traffic. Maybe Isabella needed more time to get ready. I tried to feed myself these small, plausible excuses, but a familiar knot of anxiety was tightening in my stomach. By 4:30, the food was losing its warmth. The candles were burning low, their little flames dancing in the growing dimness. I turned the music down, the cheerful carols suddenly feeling jarringly out of place. At 4:45, the doorbell chimed. A surge of relief, sharp and overwhelming, rushed through me. I smoothed my dress, took a calming breath, and hurried to the door, a welcoming smile already forming on my face. But it wasn't them. It was a young man in a generic courier uniform, holding a crisp white envelope. He barely made eye contact. "Delivery for Clara Beaumont," he mumbled, handing it to me before turning and jogging back to his unmarked van. I stood on the porch, the damp, cold air seeping through the cashmere of my dress. The envelope felt unnervingly light in my hands. Inside, a single sheet of expensive-looking stationery was folded in half. The note was written in Isabella's elegant, precise script. "Clara, so sorry for the last-minute change. We decided to have a quieter Christmas at my mother's this year. Hope you have a lovely day. Best, Isabella." Not love. Not "we'll see you soon." Just best. The words were polite, sterile, and utterly devastating. A quieter Christmas. As if my home, with its single, waiting occupant, could be anything but. They hadn't forgotten. They hadn't been held up. They had made a choice. And they hadn't even had the decency to make a phone call. I walked back into my beautiful, fragrant kitchen. The candles flickered, casting long shadows on the wall. The table, set for 3, looked like a museum exhibit, a perfect diorama of a family dinner that would never happen. I sat down at my empty table, in my beautiful dress, and looked at the 2 vacant chairs. The silence that I had worked so hard to keep at bay rushed back in, louder and more desolate than ever before. My throat was too tight to eat. I stared at the golden brown skin of the chicken, the fluffy peak of the mashed potatoes, the crumble I had baked with such love. It was all just food now, objects on a table. The magic had vanished. Methodically, I blew out the candles. I turned off the music. I began the lonely work of packing the feast into plastic containers, my movements slow and heavy. The festive warmth had leached out of the house, leaving behind only the chill of a profound and deliberate exclusion. Later that evening, unable to settle, I opened my laptop. I rarely looked at social media, but some morbid curiosity guided my fingers. Isabella's sister had a public Instagram account. And there it was. A photo posted just an hour earlier. A long, crowded dining table, sparkling with crystal and laughter. Isabella was there, radiant in a red sweater, raising a glass of wine. And beside her, with his arm draped possessively around her chair, was my son, Adam. He was smiling, a wide, unburdened smile, caught mid-laugh. The caption beneath the photo read, "Nothing better than a full house and a happy heart for the holidays. So grateful for family." I didn't comment. I didn't like it. I just closed the laptop. The image was burned into my mind. They hadn't just chosen another family. They had celebrated it, broadcasting their joy while I sat in a silent house filled with the ghosts of Christmas past. And in that moment, I knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that something had irrevocably broken. It hadn't just broken tonight. It had been fracturing for a long, long time, and I had simply refused to see the cracks. Now I saw them. And I knew, with a resolve that felt cold and hard as stone, that I could no longer pretend they weren't there. That night, sleep was a distant shore I couldn't reach. I sat in the living room, the only light coming from the twinkling bulbs on the Christmas tree. Henry's armchair sat empty across from me, a silent testament to all that was gone. I could almost hear the faint, rumbling snore he'd always slip into after a big meal, a sound I used to gently complain about. Now, the silence it left behind was a physical ache. My mind drifted back through the years, to Christmases when the house was bursting with life. Henry, perched precariously on a ladder, stringing lights along the eaves while I was inside, my hands dusted with flour, pulling trays of sugar cookies from the oven. A small Adam, in his dinosaur-footed pajamas, tearing wrapping paper with ferocious glee, more interested in the rustling and the ribbons than the gifts themselves. We had rituals, a comfortable rhythm that defined our holidays. A big breakfast Christmas morning, Henry sneaking a slice of pie before noon, and the day ending with all of us curled on the sofa, watching the same black and white holiday films we'd seen 100 times. The shift had been subtle at first, a gradual erosion I'd explained away. When Adam and Isabella first married, they spent Christmas with her family. It's only fair, I'd told myself and anyone who asked. They're newlyweds. The next year, it was the same. I suggested a New Year's brunch instead. They agreed, then canceled at the last minute. Work emergency, Adam had said, his voice strained. I didn't want to be a demanding mother-in-law, a cliché of maternal neediness. So I made myself smaller. I asked for less. I accepted the rushed, perfunctory visits. They'd arrive late, stay for an hour, Isabella scrolling through her phone while I tried to engage Adam in conversation. He'd hover near her, his attention divided, as if waiting for a silent cue that their obligation was fulfilled and they could leave. Last year, they'd arrived 2 hours late for Christmas dinner, admitting they'd already eaten a full meal at her mother's. They picked at the food on their plates, offering hollow compliments. "This is delicious, Clara." Then they were gone before I could even serve the dessert. Still, I kept trying. I held on to the belief that if I just made our home inviting enough, warm enough, redolent enough of the love he'd grown up with, he would remember. That the gravitational pull of childhood memory and a mother's love would eventually win out. But this year was different. This year, Henry was gone. This year, I was truly alone. And they didn't just sideline me. They erased me from the day entirely. Not even a call. What had I done wrong? The questions circled relentlessly. Was I too needy? Did I talk about Henry too much, casting a pall of grief over the house? Was I not modern enough for Isabella, with my landline and my decades-old china? Did she resent the history that lived in the walls of this house, a history that didn't include her? I scrolled through her sister's Instagram again, torturing myself with the images of their happy, complete family. The gleaming table, the expensive wine, the easy camaraderie. Thankful for another year surrounded by love, one caption read. The words were a sharp, precise sting. It wasn't their happiness that hurt, it was the casual, complete oblivion to my existence. I looked at the clock. 10:23 p.m. Still no word from Adam. Not a text. Not a "Merry Christmas, Mom." Nothing. My gaze fell upon the stockings hanging from the mantelpiece. One for me, one for Henry, and one for Adam. I'd hung them out of habit, a desperate attempt to maintain a sense of normalcy. But there was nothing normal about this. The house felt stripped bare, not just of a person, but of a feeling, the fundamental sense of belonging, of mattering to the people you had poured your life into. I began to clear the dining table again, putting away the unused plates and silver. As I wiped down the polished wood, my eyes landed on Henry's chair. I remembered the year Adam, fresh out of college and proud of his first real paycheck, had bought Henry a bottle of single malt scotch for Christmas. Dad deserves the good stuff, he'd said, beaming. Henry, a man of few emotional displays, had teared up. Now, that same son couldn't be bothered to pick up the phone. Later, sitting on the edge of my bed, still in my cashmere dress, I felt a weariness that went deeper than sleeplessness. I was 71 years old, and in the space of a single day, I felt I had aged a decade. The realization that settled in my heart was a cold, heavy stone. Adam hadn't just forgotten me on Christmas. He had been letting go of me for a very long time. I had just been too busy holding on for both of us to notice. The next morning, the world outside was washed in a pale, watery light. The rain had stopped, leaving a clean, damp scent in the air. I bypassed the coffee maker and pulled on a warm coat, stepping out into the garden. Henry always said a morning walk around the yard could untangle any problem. I walked past the dormant rose bushes and the skeletal remains of my summer hydrangeas, my breath pluming in the cold air. My steps led me, as they often did, to his old gardening shed at the far end of the yard. It was a small, sturdy structure he'd built himself, with a sloping roof and a window overlooking the woods behind our property. I hadn't been inside since he passed. The door creaked open, revealing the familiar, earthy smell of potting soil, cedar, and old tools. Everything was in its place, his trowels hanging on a pegboard, bags of soil stacked neatly, his worn gardening gloves resting on the workbench. And there, on a high shelf, tucked inside a large terracotta pot he always used for his tomato seedlings, was a small, lacquered wooden box. It wasn't dusty. It had been placed there deliberately. My fingers trembled as I lifted it down. There was no lock. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was an old-fashioned brass key and a single, folded sheet of his familiar cream-colored stationery. I unfolded the note. The handwriting was Henry's, strong, angular, unmistakable. Clara, if you are reading this, it means the silence has grown too loud. It's time you had a place of your own. The key is for P.O. Box 72 in Seacliff. What's inside is yours. It always was. All my love. Henry. Seacliff. A tiny, rugged town about an hour's drive north along the coast. We'd stopped there for coffee a few times over the years, but we had no connection to it. A post office box? I sank onto an old wooden stool, the key cold in my palm. He had anticipated this. Henry, my quiet, observant Henry, had seen the slow, painful drift. He had known, long before I was willing to admit it, that I might one day need a refuge. I drove back to the house, my mind racing. I went to his desk in the study, a space I'd kept exactly as he'd left it. I searched the drawers, but there was no paperwork, no deed, no mention of any property in Seacliff. This was something he had kept entirely separate, a secret held in trust for a future he hoped I'd never have to face. The phrase from his note echoed in my head, "It's time you had a place of your own." He wasn't just talking about a building. He was talking about a space free from the weight of expectation, from the painful duty of trying to hold a fragmenting family together. He was giving me a place where I could just be Clara. I looked at the family portrait on the bookshelf, the three of us at Adam's graduation. We were all smiling, but looking at it now, I saw something new. Henry's eyes weren't on the camera. They were on Adam, a look of steady, quiet assessment on his face. He knew. He had seen the man our son was becoming, even as I saw only the boy he used to be. That afternoon, I packed an overnight bag. A change of clothes, a book, the thermos Henry always used for his coffee. I didn't know what I would find in that post office box, what door that key might metaphorically or literally open, but I knew I couldn't wait. A current of purpose, stronger than any I'd felt in months, was pulling me north. As I zipped my bag, my eyes fell on the green cashmere dress draped over a chair. It no longer looked like a symbol of lonely hope, but a relic of a life I was leaving behind. Henry had been gone for 8 months, but for the first time, it felt like he had just spoken to me, and I was finally ready to listen. The drive to Seacliff felt like a pilgrimage. I followed the coastline, the Pacific churning a slate gray to my left, the dense Oregon forest a deep, brooding green to my right. The air grew salter, the town smaller and more rugged. Seacliff was little more than a main street with a handful of shops, a tavern, and a post office housed in a weathered clapboard building. Inside, the P.O. box was small and unassuming. The brass key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. The contents were simple, another, larger key and a thick manila envelope. My hands were unsteady as I carried it back to my car. Inside the envelope was a formal deed and a single folded note. I read the note first. "My dearest Clara, this is for you. A place to breathe. A place to remember that your worth is not measured by who shows up at your table." I unfolded the deed. The document was in my name alone, Clara Beaumont. The property was a cottage on a street called Osprey Lane. I typed the address into my phone's map. It was just a few minutes away, on a quiet road that wound up into the hills overlooking the ocean. Osprey Lane was unpaved, bordered by towering Sitka spruces. And there it was. Tucked into a clearing was a modest, cedar-shingled cottage with sea blue trim. It had a stone chimney and a wide front porch with 2 rocking chairs. It looked like it had grown out of the landscape, sturdy and peaceful. I parked and walked up the creaking wooden steps. The second key, the one from the P.O. box, fit the front door. As the lock turned, a profound sense of coming home washed over me, which was impossible, as I had never been here before. The air inside was cool but not musty. It was clean, cared for. And it was furnished. But not with a stranger's things. The living room had a comfortable, worn leather sofa just like the one we'd had in our first apartment. The bookshelves were filled with Henry's favorite authors, Steinbeck, Cather, and a shelf of poetry. A faded, hand-stitched quilt I recognized from our guest room was draped over an armchair. He had been slowly moving pieces of our life here, creating a secret sanctuary, a backup of our home. On the small mantel above the stone fireplace were 2 framed photographs. One was of the two of us on our 25th anniversary, laughing on a beach. The other was a candid shot I'd never seen before. Henry, sitting on this very porch, a mug in his hands, looking out at the sea with a serene, contented expression. I walked into the kitchen. The cupboards were stocked with non-perishables, pasta, canned tomatoes, coffee, tea. A grocery list was taped to the inside of a cabinet door, in his handwriting, listing staples, eggs, milk, bread, butter. He had planned for me to arrive and be able to make a meal. The small dining table was set for one. In the bedroom, the bed was neatly made with a simple white duvet. The closet held a few of his old flannel shirts and a thick wool sweater. In one of the drawers of the dresser, I found a stack of his journals. This was more than a house. It was an archive of his love, a tangible manifestation of his foresight and care. He had seen it all coming: Adam's slow withdrawal, Isabella's quiet influence, my own determined, painful hope. And instead of confronting them, which he knew would have shattered the fragile peace I was trying so hard to maintain, he built me a lifeboat. He didn't tell me about it because he didn't want me to live in expectation of the shipwreck. He wanted me to have it only when I truly needed it. I sat on the porch, in one of the rocking chairs, and looked out at the sliver of gray ocean visible through the trees. The note came back to me, a place to breathe. And that's what I did. I took a deep, shuddering breath, and for the first time since April, it didn't feel like I was just trying to stay afloat. It felt like I was finding solid ground. This cottage wasn't a monument to what I had lost, it was a testament to what I still had. Myself. My resilience. And the enduring love of a man who had known me better than I knew myself. I wasn't forgotten. I had been found. 3 days after I discovered the cottage, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some instinct made me answer. Mrs. Beaumont? Clara Beaumont, a man's voice asked, warm and professional. Yes, this is she. My name is William Carter. I was your husband's financial advisor, and I'd like to think his friend. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. No, it's fine, I said, sinking into a kitchen chair. Good. Henry left me with some very specific instructions, he began. I was to contact you only if I had reason to believe that, well, that circumstances had significantly changed for you within the family. He gave me your son's name as a point of reference. He asked me to reach out if you ever felt you were being pushed aside. He paused, allowing the implication to settle. I take it circumstances have shifted. I looked at the cruel, tidy note from Isabella, which I still had on my counter. Yes, I said, my voice quiet but firm. They have. Then I think it's time we met. There is information Henry wanted to ensure you had, for your own protection. We met the following day in his modest office in a quiet part of Port Blossom. Mr. Carter was a man in his late 60s with kind, intelligent eyes and a gentle demeanor. He got right to the point, pulling out a slim file. Henry was a meticulous man, he said. About 5 years ago, he began to restructure some of his assets. He set up a private trust in your name only. It's completely separate from the main family estate portfolio. He slid a summary statement across the desk. I stared at my name at the top of the page. Beneath it, a number that made my breath catch, $580,000. He called it his rainy day fund for you, Mr. Carter continued softly. He was worried that if he passed first, you might be pressured to make financial decisions you weren't comfortable with. He wanted you to have complete autonomy, a safety net no one else could touch or even know about. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I had no idea. That was his intent. But his concern wasn't abstract. Mr. Carter pulled another sheet from the file. It was a log of financial requests. Adam approached him several times over the years. In 2015, he asked for $30,000 to start a tech venture. Henry gave it to him as a gift. In 2018, he asked for $80,000 for another business idea. Henry declined. This was news to me. Adam had never mentioned being turned down. The requests became more frequent in the last year or so, Mr. Carter said, his expression somber. They were framed as helping to manage the estate for your future benefit. Henry saw it for what it was, an attempt to gain control. He then slid a final document toward me. It was a copy of a cash check from our joint account, dated 2 years prior. The check was for $12,000. The signature, at first glance, looked like mine. The bank flagged this, he explained. The signature was a very good forgery, but not perfect. Henry investigated quietly. The money was paid to a contractor for renovations on a rental property in Astoria, a boutique hotel project Isabella was managing. The air left my lungs. They had forged my signature. Stolen from us. Henry confronted them privately. They denied it, of course. Adam claimed it must have been a clerical error. But Henry knew. He told me that was the day he opened the private trust for you. He said, they aren't planning for her future, William. They're planning around it. I sat in stunned silence, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The rushed visits. Isabella's casual questions about our will. Adam's vague talk about long-term investments. It was never about concern for me. It was a long, patient campaign to secure their inheritance. The trust is yours, Clara, Mr. Carter said, his voice gentle. Untouchable. He also left instructions for an additional transfer from a small business account upon our meeting. Another $75,000 will be moved into your name by the end of the week. He stood and handed me the folder. Take your time with all of this. There's no rush. Henry's only goal was to give you options. To give you power. I walked out of his office and into the crisp winter air. The world felt both sharper and more fragile. My grief for Henry deepened, but it was now mingled with a profound, aching gratitude. He had been my shield, even from beyond the grave. He hadn't just seen my pain, he had seen my son's ambition and my daughter-in-law's greed. I wasn't being overly sensitive or paranoid. I was being targeted. They had been waiting for him to be gone so they could dismantle the life we had built, piece by piece. But Henry, my quiet, steadfast Henry, had built me a fortress first. And now I was standing inside it. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I was home from the cottage, sorting through some of Henry's papers, when a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Adams. I watched from the window as he got out, Isabella remaining in the passenger seat, staring at her phone. A wave of cold resolve washed over me. He knocked. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. I simply stood in the doorway, a silent barrier. Mom, he began, his tone a carefully calibrated mix of contrition and concern. We need to talk. I know Christmas was a mess. I'm sorry. Things got complicated. Complicated, I repeated, my voice flat. Yeah, Isabella's mom, it was just easier. We should have called. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he always used when he was lying. Anyway, that's not why I'm here. I was thinking, with everything you're dealing with, I could help. You know, with Dad's accounts, the paperwork. Just to take the burden off you. There it was. The gentle, helpful offer that was anything but. What makes you think I have a burden, Adam? He blinked, thrown off by my directness. Well, I mean, you're on your own now. We're just worried. You haven't called in over a month, I stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. I know, it's been crazy. Isabella's project. You mean the boutique hotel project in Astoria? I asked, my voice calm and low. He froze. The color drained from his face. I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes as he realized I knew more than he'd ever imagined. How did you? Don't worry about how I know, Adam. Just answer this. Did you know Isabella forged my signature on that check? He couldn't meet my eyes. He looked down at the porch steps, his silence a confession. You weren't coming here to check on me, I said, the truth of it landing with the weight of a stone. You were coming to check on your inheritance. Mom, no, it's not like that. Don't, I said, my voice hardening just enough to stop him. I know about the private trust. I know about the accounts Henry separated. And I know about every single time you asked him for money and he said no. He looked utterly defeated, like a child whose carefully constructed tower of blocks had just been toppled. I don't need your help managing anything, I said, stepping back slightly, widening the space between us. Henry made sure I was taken care of. He made sure I was protected. From you. The last two words hung in the cold air between us. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. The game was over. You should go home, Adam, I said softly. He nodded, a jerky, defeated movement. He turned without another word and walked back to the car. I watched him get in, saw Isabella lean over to speak to him, her expression sharp and questioning. The car backed out of the driveway and sped down the street. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding not with anger, but with a strange, liberating clarity. The final tie of illusion had been severed. I was no longer waiting, no longer hoping. I was free. Henry hadn't just left me a cottage and some money. He had left me the truth. And the truth, however painful, was a foundation I could finally build on. A few days later, my friend Helen, a retired lawyer who lived down the street, called me, her voice urgent. "Clara, I heard something you need to know. My niece works at the county courthouse. She overheard one of Isabella's cousins talking. They're saying you're unwell, confused, that you might need someone to oversee your affairs." A chill went down my spine, but it was followed by a surge of cold fury. They weren't just going to walk away. They were going to try to have me declared incompetent. "She's not just greedy, Clara," Helen said grimly. "She's vicious." That afternoon, Helen came over with her laptop and a pot of strong tea. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table I'd set for 3 on Christmas, and we drafted a formal letter. It was addressed to Adam and Isabella, sent via certified mail. It stated in clear, unequivocal legal terms that I was of sound mind and body, in full control of my financial and personal affairs, and that any attempt to challenge my competency would be met with the full force of the law. I added a single line at the bottom in my own hand: "I am not confused. I am just no longer compliant." Sending that letter felt like closing a heavy door on the past. I was no longer a victim of their narrative. I was the author of my own. That evening, Mr. Carter came by. He carried a small, taped box. "Henry asked me to give this to you when I felt the time was right," he said, placing it on the table. He said it was the last piece. Inside was a dark green, leather-bound journal. Henry's. I opened it with trembling hands. The first page read, "For Clara. In case I don't get to say it all." For hours, I sat and read. Page after page, he had chronicled his growing fears for me, his observations of Adam's changing character, his quiet heartbreak over the son he was losing. He wrote about my strength, but also my tendency to give until I was empty. "She will keep pouring herself out for them," he wrote, "and they will just keep taking. I have to build her a new cup." And then I found it. Near the end of the journal, a detailed plan. Not just for the trust and the cottage, but for something more. He had used a portion of his own private savings to seed a small charitable foundation. He'd already filed the preliminary paperwork. He had even given it a name: the Clara Beaumont Fund for Women's Resilience. Its mission was to provide small grants to women in our community who found themselves suddenly alone, overlooked, or starting over in midlife. Widows, divorcees, empty nesters. Women who, like me, had dedicated their lives to others and were now faced with building a new one for themselves. I held the journal to my chest and wept. Not with grief, but with a love so immense it felt like it could shatter me and put me back together all at once. He hadn't just protected me. He had given me a purpose. He had seen not just the woman I was, but the woman I could become. 1 year later. Christmas morning. I am at the cottage in Seacliff. The air smells of cinnamon, baking apples, and the salty tang of the sea. Helen is in the kitchen, directing traffic, her laughter echoing through the small house. This year, the table is set for 12. The chairs are filled with the women from my new support group, the first beneficiaries of the Clara Beaumont Fund. There's a young artist I'm mentoring and her 2 small children who have decorated my tree with lopsided, glitter-covered paper stars. The house is noisy, chaotic, and filled with a light and warmth that feels real and earned. A card arrived yesterday. Plain cream envelope, no return address. Inside, a generic holiday greeting. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Hope you are well. Adam and Isabella." I read it, felt a faint flicker of something, not pain, just a distant memory of it, and placed it in a drawer. It holds no power here. Last year, I cooked a feast for a family that had already left the table. This year, I built a new table. After dinner, as the children play on the porch and the women share stories over coffee, I step outside into the crisp, cold air. The sun is setting, painting the sky in strokes of rose and gold. I sit in Henry's rocking chair, a wine glass in my hand, and listen to the sounds of life and laughter spilling from my home. Henry was right. You don't need blood to build a family. You just need heart. It took me a year of sorrow and silence to understand that. I had to let go of the family I thought I was supposed to have to make room for the one that was waiting for me. This is the dinner that matters. This is the table where I belong. The past can send its cards, its polite, empty greetings. But I am no longer waiting by the door. I am here, in this house built by love, surrounded by a resilience that is both mine and ours, finally home.